Ons hoofgas vanoggend, die formidabele Dr. Anthea Jeffery. Dr. Jeffery, welcome once again. Let's start off right away. You know, I tried to do a bit of research and I could find a lot about your professional career and the impact of your work as a political analyst, but no one could tell me where you were born. So, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And just your study years and what brought you to this place as a political analyst with such a voice in South Africa?
I was born in Johannesburg. I went to school here and then to Wits, where I started doing law by accident and discovered that I really liked it. And then, fortunately, I had the opportunity to get a scholarship and to go and study in England. So I went to Cambridge, which sounds very grand, and I later went to the University of London. And in between, I did articles with one of the big international law firms. And all the time I was feeling law is interesting, but it doesn't really speak to me. And I want to be in South Africa, and I'm more interested in politics, really. So I came back, and I was very lucky to join the Institute of Race Relations. And I did so in 1990, at a time when, you know, those of us who are old enough to remember will know there was a tremendous amount of political violence happening. There was a moment of great hope, because we were now embarking on constitutional negotiations. But we also had a level of violence far greater. 3 times greater than anything we'd ever known. So it became my job to try and understand that. And that put me in touch with really the 2 aspects of the ANC's revolution. The first part of it is the People's War in order to gain political power. And to gain political power, you must eliminate black rivals. The second part of it is to use the political power, the state power you acquire, to implement the second stage of the revolution, which is where we are now, the National Democratic Revolution moving towards socialism.
Yeah, but let's go back to the Institute for Race Relations. What do you think the role of this organization is in South Africa? What is it that you want to achieve? And do you think that you are making an impact or that difference that you're hoping for?
Yes, I do think so. The Institute is one of the oldest organizations, NGOs in the country. It was formed in 1929 to promote racial goodwill. It was the first anti-apartheid organization. And it was really, saw its job as trying to bring together people across the spectrum and to promote democracy and to promote economic growth and things that would make it easier for people to become prosperous, successful, self-reliant. And that's still our mission in this very different context. And I think we have now a much greater reach than we've had before, partly because we don't just rely on books anymore. We have quite an active social media program. And I think we reach audiences in a whole number of different ways. And with a message which I think people increasingly need to hear, because so many people are so worried about what's going wrong.
It's exactly.
And I think the Institute has insights into what that is and also has solutions to offer.
And that's exactly my next question to you, because so many of us are worried and feeling maybe a little bit hopeless. But what is a message that the Institute and that you can bring to South Africans that find themselves in that hopeless place?
That really we are in a different situation now because the disillusionment has grown, because we have a coming election. And we know that last time round, if you look at the figures, there were 10 million that voted for the ANC and 18 million that could have voted but didn't vote at all. So that's a very big group of potential voters who may now finally feel they can't waste their votes by just staying away. And we also have a vast range now of political parties that are coming up that are promising that they'll work together. So there is, though we don't have one big party to trounce the ANC, the real opportunity to have a change of government to a range of parties that appeal to slightly differently to right across the political spectrum, but can work together to push growth, investment, jobs, the things that most people most want.
It's the most awful thing to have to stop you and interrupt you, but we have to do it now. We're out of time. Davi and Leon will chat to you later.
With growth stalling, joblessness at crisis levels and governance unravelling, most South Africans cannot fathom why the ANC does not embark on meaningful reform. This is from your latest book. It's the 12th one, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Countdown to Socialism. Can you give us a brief synopsis of it? Well, what is this about?
In essence, it's an attempt to explain to South Africans why it is that we're doing so badly. And the reason is that the ANC, for the last 30 years, certainly since they took power, is deeply committed to moving the country from a primarily capitalist free market economy to a socialist one. And the mechanism to do that is the National Democratic Revolution, or NDR, which is a Moscow-inspired strategy worked out in the 1950s at a time when many colonies were becoming independent to achieve the same goal. And the NDR, with the socialist goal, is playing out in at least 17 different policy areas, which is what the book deals with. And it says in each one, what are the goals here? What has been done to achieve those goals? And what are the consequences? And the hope is that once you've read that, which I've tried to put really as clearly and simply as possible, you can kind of get a bird's eye view of just how the NDR is proceeding in all these many different spheres. And unfortunately, we've already had a great deal of damage to the political system, to the economy. Some of the worst interventions still lie ahead, particularly the push for expropriation without compensation, for the national health insurance system, for things like a basic income grant, and the sort of state taking control of all pensions. All of this in a context where we don't have enough revenue. We do have massive debt. And increasingly, the economy is being pushed into crisis.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned something like expropriation without compensation, which has even got an acronym now. So are we sort of saying, so this is coming from, I mean, I can pick up big things. I'm not very clever. So it's sort of becoming clear when I listen to you and Dawie, we move, so the move or the sort of going towards socialism, that's the bad thing here, right? So are we saying that, are you saying that the ANC is willfully and, like they say in Afrikaans, met voorbedachte rade, intently going towards pushing for socialism through this national democratic revolution? Sounds like a political party almost.
Absolutely, it is very intentional. And the idea is that state control, state ownership must constantly expand. At the same time, you must roll back the capitalist market so that business can supply less and less. You must increase the dependency of ordinary people on the state. And ultimately, the ANC will be very happy if there is total dependency. If there's only state provision of education, healthcare, transport, pensions, any kind of social system must be provided entirely by the state. Even jobs must come entirely from the state. And property must be owned or controlled by the government. And that means that you don't have what Dawie was talking about. When you have private ownership, then a great number of people all own bits and pieces, and nobody has complete control over us. Give the state ownership, and it does have complete control over us. And that is a very scary thought.
It is, especially with our government, let's be honest. I wanted to ask you so much more, but Davie's going to continue this conversation. I would just like to mention that this book is now, according to Nielsen, who does also book data and stuff, it's in the top 100 in number 14 currently, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna ask our ontbytSAKE kijkers to get this to number 1 at least. Well, I suppose you've got
would be great.
Top 10 at least. Thank you so much. It was so nice chatting to you. Looking forward to you and Davie's chat as well.
My beurt om met Dr. Anthea Jeffery te gesels en teen hierdie tyd weet julle al dat ek seker haar grootste fan is. Daar's geen twyfel daaroor nie. I'm so glad you're here this morning.
Thank you very much.
We've just had an election in Zimbabwe, and it seems to me about even SADC, who was quite critical on the election there. But it seems to me as if the ANC is not too worried about the results or the whole election. They seem to be thinking that it was free and fair. The reason why I ask you this is this something that we need to be concerned about? Because we have an election coming next year for us.
Yes, indeed. I think every election up to now, the ANC's been pretty confident of winning.
Yes.
Except perhaps the 1994 one, but that was a long time ago. So in terms of the 2024 election, there may be more of an incentive to start cheating if the ANC really does think that its power is at risk. But there is, for the ANC, the great advantage of the Electoral Amendment Act, which has introduced a new system where independents can stand for seats in Parliament. And there's a sort of complicated system where some of the votes that can't be used for the independents because they don't get enough or they get more than they need will kind of be redistributed, and they'll go primarily to the biggest parties. So the first thing that the ANC can be relying on is that if they were to win 45% of the vote, they might still get 51% of the seats in the National Assembly. So that is something, if it happens, that will have to be contested after the event. And for the rest, I think what we need to put a great deal of faith and hope in is the fact that we have the 18 million eligible voters who didn't vote last time round, as I was saying. And many of them have thought that they punished the ANC by staying away. But I think now the degree of disillusionment is such, and that there are also alternative opposition possibilities coming up. The idea that you have the coalition, the idea that a whole number of different parties will work together to bring growth, investment, jobs, is a different thing that we've never had before. And I've hoped very much that that will encourage people who've wanted to punish the ANC by staying away to go to the polls and vote for one of those other parties instead.
So it seems to me as if we're in a transition to something else politically in South Africa. Can it be compared to 30 years ago? Is it similar in a way?
I think it could be as significant. Certainly if the ANC is voted out of power and if the coalition parties are then able to introduce good policies that get the economy going, then I think South Africa will not look back. Then we'll be able to roll back the socialist interventions that we've been suffering for all these years.
But I think chances are still good that we still will have an ANC government even after the elections. But I want to talk a little bit about the president, because I think if the ANC really suffers in the election, chances are quite good that the president will be replaced or recalled. And of course, the alternatives will be potentially the deputy president, for example, or even Fikile Mbalula could be either deputy president or who knows. But the reason why I ask you this is that, first of all, do you think there's a possibility that the president will be replaced by somebody else? And secondly, what does the president think about what you call the National Democratic Revolution? He's a billionaire. He certainly can't support that.
Starting with your first question, I don't think it's that likely that he will be replaced because he has this aura about him, which I don't think is deserved. Part of it comes from the fact that he's a billionaire. But of course, he's not an entrepreneur who made that money in a risk-taking enterprise. He's very much benefited from BEE and the possibility of taking part in deals and board memberships and so on, all of which have brought him a great deal of money. And in terms of the NDR, I believe he's deeply committed to it. He has described himself as a committed socialist, though not a member of the SACP. And at the SACP Congress last year in July 2022, he was pictured there with the General Secretary of the Communist Party. And he explained to the assembled delegates that the ANC and the SACP both regard the NDR as their joint program, and that the ANC will do everything that it needs to advance and defend the NDR from any threats to it, because they are both working towards the common goals of the NDR.
I want to talk about that just a little bit just after this. Ons maak gou 'n vinnige draai by ons en die Springboks se trotse vliegborg FlySAFE en dan gesels ons verder.
Vlieg met die lugredery wat die nasie bymekaar bring. Vriende, familie en kollegas met meer vlugte, meer gereeld na al die groot stede in Suid-Afrika en selfs Mauritius. FlySAFE vir die liefde van vlieg.
Ek gesels verder met Dr. Anthea Jeffery. You spoke about the ANC and the South African Communist Party. We have a tripartite alliance in South Africa, the ANC, the Communist Party and COSATU. And I guess they all have certain functions. So can you perhaps how do you see the various roles of the various role players in the Tripartite Alliance?
The primary institution is, of course, the Communist Party. It's always the leader. It's the one that has the ideas. And as Ramaphosa said at that same Congress, the ANC looks to the SACP to be its intellectual inspiration, virtually. And the SACP had, of course, always very strong connections with the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union disbanded, there are still any number of left-leaning socialist communist parties in existence, banded together in the Socialist International, with whom it has strong links. So it's not trying to work this all out on its own. There is, in fact, a whole, you might say, network of organizations where the aim is to try and move away from capitalism to socialism, and do so with the help and advice of socialists around the world. And that the ANC's main role is to be the collector of the votes. The ANC has always rather fudged its commitment to socialism. If you look at some of its documents that aren't publicly well known, it will say, of course, the socialist goal is there at the end, but we must downplay it because it would reduce the support we can gain if we were to talk about it openly now. So socialism at the end, the SACP obviously socialism now, and the ANC with the capacity, because it's seen as the organisation that brought freedom to South Africa, with the organisation with the capacity to bring the votes together and make sure that the Tripartite alliance remains in power. And of course, Kasasha being very active in the Labour front because the working class is the main motive force of the NDR.
If I say that in the end our only real guarantee is democracy, real democracy, so I think that is the buck stops with real democracy if you can have. But talking about the National Democratic Revolution, it's democracy, is it not? So why should we be scared of it?
Because it's a people's democracy that's envisaged.
Is that
in
not
other
bad?
Words,
But that can't be bad. It must be good.
I think it's a people's democracy of the same kind that you had in the Soviet Union, that you have in China, where certainly there's been an economic liberalization, but not a political one at all, and where even the economic liberalization has now been curtailed. So a people's democracy, I think, is quite a scary thing because it does connote a socialist system where you do have a state with enormous control over the means of production, the means of distribution, etc. And because it has that much control, it decides on, as you were saying, what is produced, at what prices, and it has so much capacity to direct the resources of the society that it has a level of power that I think is impossible to imagine when you're in a primarily capitalist country. And it also has the power to direct a lot of the resources into the hands of the party. So the party becomes both enormously politically powerful and economically powerful. And this is the great attraction of it. And there's therefore a great irony that a socialist will always say capitalism creates so much inequality. Socialism makes sure that everybody has the same. But the real inequality is between the poverty of the masses and the wealth and the power of the very top elite. And that is a level of inequality far beyond what you will find in capitalism.
It always leads to some sort of dictatorship. I want to get to when we're just about done. What are the solutions? And quickly,
to South Africa?
Yeah, what must we do to prevent this?
We must, first of all, vote the ANC out of power, make sure that the coalition government has sensible policies and stays in power and implements it. Those sensible policies primarily involve getting growth, which means that we must protect property rights. So we must scrap EWC. We must go back to the kind of protections that we had for property rights in the past. We must make sure that we also attract investment, and we must critically really liberalise the labour market. There are so many people who can't get jobs because they're being priced out of the labour market, or because business is afraid of taking on people if in the end they go on strike, which is difficult to deal with, or they prove unsuitable and it's difficult to terminate employment. All of that must be liberalised so that if businesses can fire, then they will also hire. And we will get to the point where, again, with other policies that we need, we can improve education, we can improve technical education very quickly, and we can start expanding opportunities for people.
I have to interrupt you, Anthony. I can talk to you for hours. It was absolutely amazing. I'm just sitting and listening to you. Thank you very much for coming, but we're not done with you. We're going to feed you still. So thank you. And keep on with the good job that you are doing. I think you are just the most amazing person in the country. Thank you very much for coming and joining us this morning. En onvermijdelik is dit altyd so, dink ek, is dat sosialisme in steede daarvan dat dit lei tot gelykheid, wat dit wel na toe lei, is na 'n diktatorskap.